I'm incredibly excited to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Todd May, a philosophy professor at Warren Wilson College in beautiful North Carolina. Dr. May is one of the original contributors to the New York Times philosophy blog, The Stone, and was a philosophical advisor to the fantastic show, The Good Place. Today, he'll be discussing his just published book, Should We Go Extinct? A Philosophical Dilemma for Our Unbearable Times, which I read a few weeks ago and think is brilliant and very insightful. So after Dr. May gives his talk, we'll open up the meeting for a Q&A. In the meantime, just make sure that you stay muted if you don't mind. Okay, so without any further delay, I'll turn the virtual stage over to Dr. May. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Well, thanks, Emma, and thanks for inviting me, and thanks to all of you for stopping by. What I thought I would do, Emil, if this was okay, is talk a little bit about the background of the book, a little bit on content, right, and then just open it up and see where it goes from there. Is that good? Okay, so
Perfect. Sounds great. Yes.
good. So the background of the book is this, and there's actually a little story here. The I had been teaching courses in animal rights. I'd been teaching courses in philosophy of war, courses in the climate crisis, and it got me thinking that there's a lot of destructive stuff that we do, and I was wondering if our further existence here was going to be justifiable. So I wrote an article for the New York Times, in the blog that Emil talks about. And it was in 2018, and the title of it was "Would Human Extinction Be a Tragedy?" And it had a lot of caveats in it, but it was apparently a very slow day on the far right. Because about an hour after the article appeared, I got an invitation to be on the Laura Ingraham show. And then another hour after that, I got an invitation to be on InfoWars. And a couple of hours after that, Ben Shapiro published a piece that said, Todd May says we should all kill ourselves, and which I explicitly denied in the article. And that, of course, as you all know, was an invitation for the hate mail. So I spent 3 or 4 days getting hate mail. And it was, I have to say, if you're going to hate mail someone, you probably want to do a little bit better than the quote that everybody gave, which was like, why don't you go extinct? And I thought, well, people, you spent time finding my email, reading whatever Ben Shapiro had to say. You could have maybe come up with something a little more ambitious, but it ended after 3 or 4 days. My wife was concerned about this. She said, "Is something terrible going to happen?" I'm like, these are not the kind of people that are going to hang for a long period of time on a moral speculation on the future of human existence, right? So sure enough, 3 or 4 days later, it died out. But the questions for me didn't die out. I still was thinking about all of the caveats I had in the article, and so finally, it was a couple of years ago. I thought, okay, I'm gonna do, and everybody, you'll all recognize this, right? What do philosophers do when they try to think something out? They just start writing. So I just started writing, and I thought, okay, what's good about our being here? What's problematic about our being here? What can we do to be more justifiable here, to be here? And that's essentially the structure of the book. It's 4 chapters. It's meant for wider audiences. It's published with Crown. I mentioned that when I first met the editor after he accepted the manuscript, it went through lots of changes. I said, look, the manuscripts I write, I hope can be read by any intelligent person. And he said, yes, but we're Crown Publishing. And so we're going for a wider readership, and we would like to reach intelligent people and also semi-intelligent people. And that's where a lot of the editing came up, right? So the book is short. It's meant for a broader audience. 4 chapters: the intro chapter, and then let me say a little bit about the other 3. So the second chapter really discusses what it is that we bring to the planet that other animals don't, or either don't to the degree that we bring it. Okay, and I divide it into issues of happiness and then what we could say broadly deontological, non-consequentialist reasons. Right? And in terms of happiness, you're all familiar, I'm sure, at least with the name of David Benatar, right? And his arguments that human lives are essentially unhappy. And I try to provide reasons to think, A, that our lives, most lives, right, are happier than he thinks. But B, the reduction to happiness seems to me too reductive. That one can talk not simply about the amount of happiness of a human life, but its meaningfulness. And I have a book on what makes what one way to think about what makes life meaningful. But my claim is that human beings seem to be capable of not, I want to say not more happiness, but different dimensions of happiness from a lot of non-human animals. So, for instance, we make plans for the future, and we can have we have long-term projects, right? And other animals don't to the degree that we have long-term projects. And so humans, I think, can contribute if happiness is a good in the world, right? If morally a happier world is better than a less happy world, then we contribute that, right, through our existence, right? But there are a couple of other things that don't fall into issues of happiness or unhappiness that we also contribute. There is a philosopher, Sarah Buss, who wrote an article, The Value of Humanity. And what Buss argues is that we may, in fact, even if we don't have intrinsic value as humans, we have an important instrumental value. And the instrumental value that we have is that we can appreciate things that have intrinsic value. So if we take art, right, or the findings of science or the discovery of truth to have intrinsic value, right, it's humans that can appreciate that. So her view is that we should be treated as ends in ourselves because of our instrumental ability to be able to appreciate things that she thinks have intrinsic value, right? Art, scientific truth, things like that. Okay. There's another philosopher at University of Pittsburgh, and who you may not have heard of, Nandi Tunison, and she wrote a book with the same title as Sarah Buss's article, right? The Value of Humanity, and she, in contrast to Buss, isn't so interested in the idea of intrinsic value. She thinks that human beings can be good for. She's right, not good in itself, but good for. But what can we be good for? We can be good for ourselves. How can we be good for ourselves? By creating lives that might have some meaning and some purpose. So Tunison's argument is that we have the ability that other animals don't have to the extent that we have it, right? To be good for ourselves in a broader human trajectory, or not just human trajectory of a life, right? So that when I pull these together, right, we have the ability to appreciate and create art, science, and meaningful lives, right? And those are the things that we have to an extent that other animals seem not to have it. And I keep using that word extent, right? Because it's not that there's not some great divide that humans can do this and other animals can't, but we can do this to a greater degree. Yeah, why? Well, for some, I guess, fairly straightforward reasons. All right, our capacity for language, the kinds of capacity for memory we have, and things like that. And my claim is that the world would be impoverished in ways if there weren't beings who could do this sort of thing. Right now, I get asked the question, and it's a good question. But if we weren't here, there'd be nobody to miss it. Right. So, in what sense would it be a loss if we weren't here? Right. And my response is, yeah, but we are here, right? And since we're here, and since we're the only people who can, since we're the ones who are making judgments about this thing, right? We look and think, yeah, that would be a loss to the planet if there weren't beings who could do that sort of thing. Now, that's that's a lot of that's a sort of quick skim of chapter two. Right? So the third chapter is that's the bad news. I call it the other side of the ledger. Right? And it has to do with the kinds of harms that we cause. And one of the things that's clear is that although non-human animals, can kill others in painful ways and cause lots of suffering, when it comes to the causing of suffering for other sentient beings, we're the Olympic gold medal on this one. And the reason we're the Olympic gold medal on this is the degree of suffering that we can cause. So I've got in the book, I talk about the number of factory farmed animals that an American is going to consume over the course of their lives. I don't have the number in my head, but right, I'm sure you'll forgive me. I'm a philosopher. These are facts, all right, and so facts. Well, that's another department. But I did some calculations on it, and it's like thousands of animals that we submit to cruelty and then eat, right? So there's that, and now one of the questions I get raised about this, and I discuss it in the book, is that that's the average American, right? A lot of people, particularly people outside the U.S., don't cause that level of suffering, which is true, right? And so the problem is that if you look at places like India and China, meat consumption is rapidly increasing and accelerating. So in China, just for instance, right, they now have pig towers, right, great giant towers where they abuse pigs, right, for meat for the growing middle class in China, right. Now let me stop over an issue that I discuss a bit at the beginning of the book, and this is something that you'll be sensitive to. That having said that, now some people say, well, look, right, that might mean that some of us deserve not to procreate because of harm, but a lot of other people don't deserve, right, to be put in that position because they don't contribute to a good bit of harm. And what I do in the book is try to answer not the question who deserves to procreate, but rather would it be better if human beings didn't procreate? And the reason I want to focus on that question is precisely because of what I've been talking about. Increasing populations of people who move into the middle class, right, will cause increasing destruction. And therefore, the issue I'm trying to approach is not the issue of deservingness, but the issue of what would be better, right, for the planet, right? So after the depressing chapter three, I moved to chapter four, and I talk about things in chapter four that we can do to justify, or I say either justify or more nearly justify our continued existence on the planet. And the idea is, the question is continued existence, right? Right. The issue of extinction, as I'm thinking about it, is not mass suicide. We're not talking about like a human Jonestown here, right? We're talking about, right, ought there to be, right, further procreation, right? And one of the reasons, and I'm sure these are things that you've all discussed that have come up, is that if we were to commit mass suicide, that's a harm to continuing existing people. But if in fact we don't procreate, we're not doing an injustice to anybody in particular, right? The way I put it in the book, there isn't this guy Fred that needs to be born, and it would be some injustice to Fred if Fred is not born, right? There's no Fred there, right? There's only a Fred if Fred comes into existence. So the question is not what we living beings should do to ourselves, but the question of whether we should procreate. Right? Now, the last chapter talks about some of the things we can do to help justify our further existence here, and some of the complications involved in that. So, for instance, factory farming, which I talk about a lot, right? In some sense, we say, well, look, why don't we just cut out factory farming? But it's not that simple, right? A lot of people, I mean, one of the reasons factory farming is as successful as it is that it produces cheap meat, and there are people who cannot afford to buy more expensive meat, right? That can buy the cheap meat, right? That is produced through factory farms. So if you're going to just eliminate factory farms, you're going to create a problematic situation for people who are impoverished. So this isn't simply a decision about factory farms. This is a decision about politics, a decision about how we can structure societies that people have access to adequate nutrition. Right. And that becomes a challenge alongside the challenge of factory farms. So the simple answer, get rid of factory farms, is not, to my mind, an adequate approach. So that's one issue I talk about. I talk about scientific experimentation, deforestation, population control. Right, recent articles seem to indicate that the human population is going to peak somewhere around 2080 at somewhere around 10 billion. And what do you do to prevent all the deforestation and factory farming that would go along with all that? Right? Now, what I've discovered, and many of you may already know this, is that in trying to limit increases in population, only one policy has ever really worked, right? It isn't handing out condoms, it isn't sex education, right? The thing that really works to limit population growth is access to education and good jobs for women, right? That's the policies that have introduced that, right, have been successful in limiting population growth, and you see it in Western countries, right? As women have had more access to education, population growth has slowed, right? So now that means, just like the issue with factory farming, that in limiting population, right, in order to limit some of the harm that we bring, we have a political issue, right? A political issue, a social issue, a cultural issue. So what I try to do in that last chapter, in talking about ways in which we can help justify our existence, is not say, here's things we ought to be doing, but rather, here's things that would be good to do, and here's some of the challenges that we face along the way. So we don't, I mean, I'm sure you've all read, but we all hate books like this that say, here's the things you do, and we think, yeah, okay, right, but those are things that if we did them, that would be fine, but that's utopia, right? And so what I try to do is say, here's the things that we should do, but here's the challenges we face in trying to do a number of these things, right? And that's where the last chapter comes in. But the last proposal that I make is, it's one that has happened to me personally. The last proposal is developing a different relationship to our fellow creatures and to nature around us. Right? I mean, it will be no surprise to anybody that we are embedded in the environment on the one hand, but we often act as though we aren't. That the environment is something out there that is a set of resources for us to use. And so, one way I think about this is that the nature and our fellow creatures are often not salient to us, right? We don't see them and experience them as our fellow creatures. And I'm as guilty as this as anybody, right? I mean, I grew up in New York City. I thought that meat grew in grocery stores. We had a cat that I had no particular relationship to until near the end of its life, right? Like people would take care of the cat, and I was a little bit allergic, but I was just not. The cat's life wasn't salient to me, and the only time I would ever feed is when the family went away, and I just mentioned when the family went away, I'd feed the cat for a few days, and then the family would come back, and the cat would look at me like, Todd, didn't we have something going here, right? I mean, couldn't you feel it the last couple of days? I'm like, no, dude, right? We didn't have anything. I fed you, a family's away. I didn't want the family to come back to a dead cat, right? But over the course of time, I sort of developed some feeling, and in working on the book, I do feel nature to be more salient to me, and other animals to be more salient to me, and I think that's an important element that undergirds a lot of the other proposals. So that's the one I saved for last. Right. Um, Now there's other elements. There's Samuel Seffler makes an appearance in there and things like that. But at least that gives an overview, right? And maybe, Emil, with that, maybe should we open up for discussion? Would that be okay? I feel like I'm taking too much time.
That was fantastic. But yes, more than happy to open this up for discussion. Um, Thank you so much for that. Yeah, really great overview. Very much appreciated. So does anybody have any questions? I certainly do. Maybe I'll go ahead and start things off
Yeah,
with,
with Emil, you read the damn book.
I did, yes. So I'd be curious if you could elaborate on what your final conclusions are about whether our extinction would be good. So that's sort of question number one, if you
Good.
don't mind. Um, what is your overall assessment? I mean, my takeaway from the book, certainly from your New York Times article, was that extinction is a mixed bag. And also, it may be useful to, at least for me, it's very useful to distinguish between, on the one hand, the process or event of going extinct,
Right.
and on the other hand, that subsequent state or condition of being extinct. So, one might hold that, okay, being extinct would be better for various reasons. On balance, considering all the arguments, being extinct would be better than being extant or continuing to exist, but also find the available options for going extinct, from getting from here to there, to be deeply problematic. There's like pro-mortalism, like maybe we could all kill ourselves or something. There's omnicide, where somebody kills everybody, including themselves. Some radical environmental movements have been sort of okay with that. And then there's antinatalism as a method for bringing
Right.
about being extinct. So it's helpful. Yeah. So I'm curious about your ultimate conclusions about the betterness or worseness of being extinct. That's question number one. I hope I'm not overloading you with too many. The second one, just very briefly, is that there are some individuals out there, including philosophers who have published in peer-reviewed journals, who have argued that, okay, yes, I basically agree with a kind of pessimistic view of the world and a kind of misanthropic um, understanding or conception of humanity. We're a terrible species. We do awful things to each other, to non-human organisms, and so on. Homo sapiens should disappear. But the solution is not to phase out our species through antinatalism or some other method. Rather, it's to replace our species. And if we can just design some post-human, creatures that don't have the same evolutionarily inbuilt tendencies that we have towards destructive habits and so on, that's the better option. So we should become post-human, or just replace our species entirely with some kind of better, superior AI system, and so on. Derek Schiller is an example of this. Maybe David Pierce as well. So I'm curious what you think about that, because it's an interesting case of like somebody agreeing with a whole lot of the criticisms of why the human condition is awful and should end, but coming to a wildly different conclusion that our lineage shouldn't disappear, but we should. So those are the two questions, if you don't mind. And
Good.
sorry,
There's
sorry
actually
for taking up so much time.
no. There's actually three there, Emil. The first one was two questions: a distinction between going extinct and being extinct, right? And is being extinct okay? And then there's the question of replacement, right? So let me address them all briefly, but in a different order, okay? So the first one I want to talk about is the distinction between going extinct and being extinct, because that's where Scheffler weighs in, right? Because Scheffler's view, is everybody familiar? Should I say something about Scheffler's view? Are people going to be familiar with it, Emil, or no?
Maybe not. So yeah,
Okay.
maybe a brief overview of it.
Okay. So Samuel Scheffer at NYU, he wrote an article for the Stone that later became a book. Actually, later became two books. Uh, and he said that one of the that he envisions a children of men scenario, all right, where all of a sudden there's no procreation. So this is not any kind of psi. This is that kind of extinction, right? The living generation is the last one. And he said that there would be a loss of meaningfulness for the currently existing people, because a lot of the projects that we engage in are projects that take a good bit of their meaning from the existence of further generations, not just our kids, right? My kids, but the existence of generations of people that we don't even know, that we won't even meet, right? Now, there's the sort of classic example: the person who's trying to come up with a cure for cancer knows they won't do it in their lifetime, but feels part of a project that's ongoing. That if there were no further generations, there would be a loss of meaning for them. But you can think of something, and I think I have this in the book, that's just more pedestrian than that. Right? A person who owns a shop, and when they retire, the thought that the shop is just going to die, right, is saps some of the sense of the meaningfulness of the work they've engaged in. So Scheffler worries about, right, going extinct, right, and I'm sympathetic to that. So Emil, I don't go any further with that, but I'm sympathetic to his idea that there would be a loss if we went extinct. But that's not a loss to the planet of our being extinct, right? That's a loss to us of going extinct. So that's the first question, right? The second one, I'm going to jump over to your last question, right? Like building better humans, right? I worry about this. And I worry about this specifically around the kinds of proposals that are made for genetic enhancement, right? Because the people who are going to be creating the supposedly better people are people like us with all of our flaws and our class biases, right? And our inequality. And my great worry about genetic enhancement is like genetic enhancement is likely to benefit some people who are already privileged, and not other people. And that what we're going to wind up with is not better human beings, but more inequality, right? And people who are better resource, because the people who are going to be creating them are us, and specifically, right, the privileged among us, right? And right, I don't think I don't think I'm bearing any trade secrets for humanity when I say that when I look at the privileged among us, those are not the people I'm going to want to entrust with my future. So I worry about the project of moral enhancement. Now we get down to the brass tack question, right? Where do I come down? And the short answer is I don't, right? And I don't for several reasons, right? Um, One is I think the issue is difficult, and I'm trying to open a conversation, right? Not close it down. And so to come up with a simple answer, particularly when there isn't a common measure here, right? I mean, if I were a utilitarian, I'd try to come up with a common measure, but I fold in happiness and then move into deontological directions. So there isn't a simple answer to come up with. Uh, my hope is that there'll be people out there smarter than I am who are going to just take this thing further and come up with answers that are better than I could have come up with. Right. That's one reason. But another reason is this. Right. I'm in the course of the book, I'm sliding toward that last chapter. Right. And the last chapter is what can we do to make ourselves more justifiable? And if I come down one way or the other, right? If I come down with we should go extinct, the last chapter becomes irrelevant. If I come down, we shouldn't go extinct, the last chapter becomes irrelevant, right? So I'm really sort of pressing on what to do to make ourselves more justifiable. And people have said to me, look, Todd, like all of these things you recommend in that last chapter are good. Why talk about extinction, right? And my response is because that lends a certain moral urgency to it, right? If we're thinking it would be great to deal with the climate crisis, to end factory farming, to cut into deforestation, right? That's one thing. But if people think if we don't do this, we might not even be justified being here, right? Right. That's what I quote Samuel Johnson saying that what I mean, I don't have the exact quote, but he says when somebody knows that they're going to be hanged in 2 weeks, it concentrates the mind, right, in a real precise way. And I think of the book as offering the possibility of a moral hanging, right? That if somehow we would possibly deserve not to go on as a species if we don't do these things, my hope is people think, well, God, which is why I do these things, right? So the the reason I don't come down is then twofold, right? One is just because the complexity issue is going to need somebody just brighter than I am to sort it out, right? And the other is that I'm really leading right toward the question of what should we do, right? And any either or yeah, any either or answer threatens to make that last chapter right moot.
Fascinating. Yeah, so I feel like extinction as a way of framing the issues that are foregrounded in the last chapter, I think is really compelling. I mean, one of the things that I have, one of the reasons that I've argued for more philosophers to take seriously the ethics of human extinction is it really does foreground and put under a microscope fundamental questions about value and meaning and worthwhileness and so on. And yeah, I don't know, discussing, yeah, framing it in terms of human extinction seems really compelling. These are the things we can do to uh, to justify our continued survival. And also, I would just add one last thing, if I may, which is that I personally find myself to be sympathetic with it's I don't have an answer. Would it be better if we no longer existed? I'm really sympathetic with views that say our extinction would be, a profound tragedy, no more laughter, friendship, knowledge, poetry, philosophy, and so on. All of that would be gone forever. But on the other hand, I'm also sympathetic with like the arguments that the voluntary human extinction movement puts out there, like we're this massively destructive force in the biosphere, and therefore the biosphere would be better without us. So, yeah, I don't know, and I think this is one of the goals of the reading group is to try to navigate the labyrinth of these issues, which are really complex, and we're at such an early stage, it's sort of sifting through them and making sense of them. So yeah, thank you so
Yeah.
much for your answer, and I hope my response wasn't longer than
No,
than the answer
that
you
was
gave.
great, and I think no, I think you're exactly right. No, let me swing over to Zach because Zach.
Yes, great, Zach, go ahead.
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to say just introduce myself. So I'm a PhD student over at King's College London, War Studies. So first of all, I just want to say thanks. That was really interesting. And I'll say in our household, you actually are a household name. We're a huge fan of The Good Place as well as Michael Shore's book, and it's fantastic. I actually invited my mom.
Okay,
I invited
that
my
makes
mom,
two
Carolyn.
households.
Okay, there you go too. So this is fantastic, and I appreciate that. So, a bit of a comment here, sort of getting at sort of piggybacking on the sort of issues like what value do we have? And I'd offer a couple thoughts that I think hasn't brought up, and maybe you touch on in your book, and I'd be curious to expand on. So first, there was a really fascinating article I read just this morning, noting that one of the consequences of not antinatalism, but like reduction in population growth in some North, I think it was Sweden, is that they're concerned about the long-term financial picture. That is, so much of the system is based on, building the taxes for, to cover retirement, healthcare. So if you don't have young people that are sort of paying into the system, you end up potentially creating larger systemic problems and able to sustain and deal with those problems. And of course, that potentially exacerbates, all these other issues. Because if you're now worried about your economic system and getting jobs, then, why should we care about saving animals or doing any other things? And then the second thought I had is, I'm struck by sort of the dependence of humanity, or the dependence of addressing a number of larger environmental issues on sort of the existence of humanity. I'm thinking in particular of sort of like super volcanoes, asteroids, many of those things that are not caused by humans, but would necessarily sort of happen. If humanity did nothing, then super asteroids would, or super volcanoes might go off and kill all sorts of everyone, and asteroids might wipe out not just human life, but all plant, animal life. And so, arguably, without humans, all animal life is going to go away anyway, which seems like there could be value. I would just be curious to get your thoughts on that as well as anyone else's. Thanks.
Good. So, Emil, should I open this up for other people? Because I don't want to dominate if other people want to just want to jump in. What Zach says is really interesting.
Honestly, whatever is totally fine. I'm just seeing that there's some comments and questions in the chat. So I'll get to those after you respond to Zach.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
yeah.
So Zach, I've been. This is the first thing you raise is that that's in current discourse, and the idea of what happens to people who are older, not just if we go extinct, but if there are a whole lot more older people than there are younger people, right? How does this work financially, right? And you have some respectable people doing it. Zach, you may also know that this is a talking point for JD Vance and his bitter cat ladies, right? But there are actually people who actually know something, right? Who are also talking about this. And I would the way I see it is this, right? I see it as a difficulty. Let's say we were come down on the side of human extinction. That this would be of difficulty in the bridge to get there. Some people say it might count as a reason not to get there. I don't think it would be a strong reason not to get there because the degree of suffering would be shorter in terms of the years of lives and the pain and suffering that is saved might be great. So I think it might be a consideration against extinction, but I don't think it would be. I don't think it would be a terribly important one. But it certainly would be a reason of the kind that I suppose it would be like an addendum to Scheffler, right? Here's something else that would be a problem, right? Now, right on the other side, right? You talk about you raise the possibility of the asteroid, right? Which is interesting, by the way, Zach. This is new for me, right? I hadn't thought about that, right? Um, uh, I want to take that and put that side by side with another question that I got in one of my presentations around the book, because they're both have a somewhat similar structure. Okay. The other question I got is this: if humans go extinct, this is going to change ecosystems. It's going to change them a lot, and we don't know what they're going to change into. So we don't know if they're going to change into something worse than what we have now, right? So Zach, you see the structural similarity, right? There are unknowns here that had we not gone extinct, it's possible that something could have happened to mitigate those unknowns, right? That would be through either continued human existence in the case of the ecosystems, or in the case of the asteroid, the humans actually being able to do something about it, right? And my response is, we don't know. We don't know if there'll ever be an asteroid that's going to hit. I mean, we know what the sun's going to do, right? But we don't know if this asteroid is going to hit the Earth, and we don't know what the change in ecosystems would be, right? But we've got to function on the basis of the kinds of things we do know. And we do know some of the effects that humans have, both positive through our existence and negative through the harm that we bring. And so that if we're going to think about our extinction, I think we have to focus more on what it is that we do know about human existence and its effects, and not on things that are possibilities that we can't put a percentage on, if I could put it that way.
If I could just expand on it a little bit, I would push back a little bit that it's a total unknown. I mean, we do have some examples looking at past asteroid impacts and sort of their impact. I realize, as you said, like you hadn't really thought about this before, so you were kind of going at it a little bit, but we do have at least some base on that. Certainly there's been examples like the Toba volcano, and I think it was the Toba, and some other super volcanic eruptions. But I get what you're saying that there is sort of that larger unknown question. It might be good in some respects.
Yeah, and it did, and even the catastrophes that happened, right? Did they had a major effects, right? Life continued, right, and rebuilt itself, right, in different ways. Whereas the continuing of human existence is right would be the continuing of these cruelties as long as we're around.
All
But
right.
it is a great question, Zach. I'm going to think about that one. That'll be in the second edition of the book.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much, Zach. Fantastic. So Carolyn had a question.
Yeah,
Yes,
hi. I'm
Caroline,
Zach's mom. Are you
wait,
there?
you're Zach's mom, you said?
I'm Zach's mom, and he invited me into this because we talk about stuff like this a lot. I actually live in Mexico in a very indigenous in Oaxaca, which has a lot of
Right.
indigenous like everyday part of how we live here. I mean, I'm the way the culture is structured around kind of a lot of basis in being much more connected to the land. And I'm
Right.
also an artist. So I come from at this from through storytelling and more like how you can visually think about these kinds of ideas and concepts. But I think as you were talking, I really appreciated your part where you're saying about what is our relationship to nature and what is our relationship to the rest of beings in the world, like all of nature being sentient beings, not just us. And I think a lot of this, some of the issue is sort of like, it's kind of like it's a species arrogance. Like we think we're the most important and we can make a better us that will be a better world, instead of like thinking about our role as humans is just another part of nature. We're not the owners. It's not there for us to just take the resources, but that we're part of this cycle. And one of the things a book that I really think a lot about is there's this book called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin, I had to write her name down, Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's a professor of biology, but she's also was raised Native American, indigenous in a community in the States. And so she comes at this as both sort of the native perspective and then also the like a scientific perspective too. And she's able to talk through biology and how it actually matches up with a lot of indigenous belief systems. And one of the things she goes, I'll try to keep this really short, she goes through is there's the three sisters, which are corn, squash, and beans, and how they have this really symbiotic relationship, and each one gives out, the beans give off the nitrogen right when the corn needs it, and the squash provides shade at exactly the time, and all these different things. And it's I won't go into all the details, very symbiotic. But then at the end she says, but there's a fourth thing in this. It's not just the three sisters who would go on and on, but the humans have to be part of it. They have to they have to harvest the corn and the seeds, and they have to replant it, and they have to be part of it. And I think if as humans, we would remember that we're part of these cycles and we're responsible to nature. We have to give back to it. We've been just taking, and we haven't been thinking about what it needs in order to survive and thrive. And we've created this imbalance, like with any species that starts taking over everything else. It's a scourge, but that doesn't mean the species it's wrong. It's just the balance is wrong, and we need to get back to that balance. So
Good.
that's my
Yeah.
that's my lines from Mexico. No?
This is great, Carolyn. Let me say a couple of things about that. Right.
Yeah.
One is when at the end when I talk about changing our relationship to nature, I give a shout out to indigenous groups, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Who I think have been. People are rediscovering, say relative to like things like controlled burns, right? What it is that indigenous groups have done and were able to do, right, before we tried to do them in, right? So I think that's an important element of it, right? So I don't say too much about indigenous groups. Simply, I'm not an expert, and I know I'm a philosopher and I'm supposed to spout off as though I know everything, but in this case, there's a limit, Caroline. Right?
Yeah. Right. Well, but I think it's more than just what they do. It's a different philosophical system.
Yeah.
And I think that the philosophy of how they approach, how they think about what they're thinking about is really valuable. And I think we missed that in our Western discussions. I actually had long ago as a philosophy major, way long time ago. But I did have one class on indigenous philosophy, and I am by no means any expert, but there is very clear ways of approaching the world, and that you see in the indigenous communities here, how they interact, that there's a lot more about sharing and community, and the arrogance thing, like people get pulled down if they're too arrogant. And I think like we just did that as a species. So anyway.
Yeah. But I'm going to point to an issue, right, with it that I mention in the book, but don't make an argument about, that your discussion leads to, which is when you talked about the system, right, of different vegetables helping one another, right. The question that comes up of the ecosystems as having intrinsic value as opposed to instrumental value. Now that's a whole discussion there, and I don't address it in the book, but I do say this, that I, particularly since moving to North Carolina and Western North Carolina and the mountains of Western North Carolina, I have definitely felt a certain resonance with the natural world around me. And in the book, I said, look, I'm not going to make an argument that it has intrinsic value. That's a separate book. But I do resonate to it and do feel as though there's something peaceful for me in thinking that when I'm gone, this will still be here. Which was not the feeling I had when in my 30 years living near Death Valley Stadium in Clemson. So the discussion of raising sweetgrass, it leads to those kinds of questions, right? That how our relationship to nature and our moral approach to nature, all of those kinds of questions get opened up, I think. And again, it's too far afield for me to try to grapple with that in the book, but I sort of basically made an invitation. Say, I resonate to this. Maybe you would resonate to this as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think that we're so disconnected for it. We don't even know what we're not connected to, because in our cities and everything. But anyway, I appreciate that you were going that way with the comment, and I wish there were a lot more discussion about that in general, because I do think that that's actually something that could make a difference in a positive way. So
yeah.
And thank you for letting me be here. It's an interesting.
Thanks for the comment, and thanks for being Zach's mom.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. He's a good kid.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. That absolutely fascinating point and great question. It definitely points to some stuff we've discussed in previous meetings. Is it our species? Is it humanity that should go extinct, or is it like, the values that underlie Western civilization? Is it capitalism that should go extinct? And actually, there are different modes of being in the world that are sustainable and are and so on and so on, and just much better. So yeah, absolutely fast, because there is that ambiguity in some discussions about human extinction. Well, actually, you're really just talking about like Western capitalist societies that should disappear, maybe not our species itself. So absolutely fascinating. Devin has a question now. Go ahead. Thanks so much, Carolyn.
Yeah, so my name's Devin, and I am a medical student, very interested in the ethics of human extinction. And I want to kind of combine some things related to Zach's questions with the topics in your book about potentially certain human faculties, like the ability to experience certain states of being or appreciate beauty or truth as being potentially justifying our existence. And then pair that with some arguments that long-termists make regarding transhumanism. And so I just kind of want to get your view on this scenario where, if we take it to be the case that when the asteroid hit Earth 66 million years ago, if we take that to be a good thing, despite all the harm that it caused at that moment and since then, if we take it to be good because of what we can experience today and our existence as humans, um, it seems to me to indicate that if there was some post-human that could experience faculties well beyond what we experience. For example, Nick Bostrom says that post-humans could experience surpassing bliss, or Toby Ord says that there might be things that could be experienced by these post-humans that are just beyond our understanding. And so if we take it to be the case that these post-humans could have experiences that are far beyond what we can experience, and we assume that, you know, the asteroid that led to the extinction of the dinosaurs and all the suffering that led to us is a good thing, then it seems that the long-termist and transhumanist position would imply that, you know, no matter how much harm is caused to current humans and existing animals, that it would be justified because post-humans could have some special form of existence that is greater than all of our existence. And there's some philosophers that have argued for this and call it the principle of best interest of post-humanity, that we should do everything we can to bring about the beneficent nature of our future descendants, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'm just very interested in what you think about this, because it seems like there's inherently in the ethics of human extinction contradictions that cannot be resolved.
Good. And I'm going to do two things. First, I'm not going to grant the first step. All right. The first step is that granting that the asteroid's creation of humans was a good thing. Now, here's what I think this needs nuance. Right. That what I am willing to grant is that some good things came from, right, the asteroid, right? Assuming that we needed the asteroid to bring us about, that some good things came. But to say that some good things came is not to say it was a good thing, right? That it had some good things that tied up in it. But if you're really going to do a comparison, you'd have to say, is this thing that happened better than the thing that would have happened otherwise, which you can't do, right? There isn't a contrast case. So I think what seems to be implied in the argument is that it's better that the asteroid occurred than it didn't occur because it brought about the possibility of these good human things, right? And that's what I'm not going to grant, right? We don't know what else would have happened. We don't know what would have been better or worse, right? So I think all we can really say is that some good things came of it, right? I think that's as far as we can go, right? Now you can see, Devin, right away that creates problems for the next stage, right? Which is transhumanism, right? But I want to create another problem for transhumanism as well, which is, I mean, there's of course the problem I brought up with it for Emil, but there's also the idea of transhumanism seems to imply a sort of non-Darwinian view of how evolution works, which is to say that okay, it creates good things, and the next thing might be better, right? But the Darwinian view is simply that what passes on as genes is what survives under certain circumstances, right? So let's suppose that the climate crisis gets really bad, and we wind up in some kind of Mad Max environment. Right. In that Mad Max environment, what's likely to survive and pass on as genes are not people that experience great bliss and joy. Right. It's going to be beings that can survive under really, really difficult circumstances. Right. So I don't think that the assumption that I'll put it this way, that the assumption that the next stage is going to be transhumans, which will be better, is necessarily justifiable, and I don't think it's a good Darwinian. I don't think it's a good Darwinian approach. So in that sense, I guess, Devin, I'm not going to give these people either the first step or the last one.
Sounds good. I can understand why you wouldn't. Thanks for your answer.
Yeah, no, thanks for the questions. Yeah. By the way, in criticizing long-termists, I'm thinking I got the side eye on Emil, who has gone after these people in a big way for reasons I'm, by the way, sympathetic with.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Devin, for that great question. Do we have, if Dr. May has a few extra minutes, do we have any additional questions? Please don't be too shy, but maybe we don't.
But these were good. I really appreciate people jumping in on this.
Yeah. This was a fantastic conversation. Yeah, very happy about it. Okay. Yes. So maybe we will bring this meeting to an end. I would like everybody, if you will, to give Dr. May a very warm virtual applause.
Thanks. Well,
Yeah,
thanks, Emil, for inviting me. Thank you for the questions. This has been a delight.
yeah, absolutely wonderful to meet you, and best of luck with the book. Once again, I thought it was really interesting, insightful, and very accessible. So I definitely would recommend to anybody watching this on YouTube to go out and get a copy. Yeah, thanks again, Dr. May, and take care, everyone.